What happens when a talk show host decides to ambush Hollywood's most controlled, most disciplined, most relentlessly positive movie star with questions designed to crack through 4 decades of carefully maintained composure? What you're about to witness is one of the most tense confrontations ever captured on daytime television. The moment when Joy Behar attempted to expose the man behind the megawatt smile and discovered that Tom Cruise didn't become one of the biggest stars in cinema history by accident. The View studio transformed into a battleground. The famous smile flickered but never broke, and Joy Behar learned that some walls are built too strong to be torn down by a few provocative questions. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments, because this confrontation will show you a side of Tom Cruise you've never seen before. The View studio buzzed with an electricity that was different from the usual morning energy. Word had spread that Tom Cruise was the guest, and the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. This was one of the last true movie stars, a man who had dominated Hollywood for over 4 decades, who had survived scandals and controversies that would have ended lesser careers, and who remained, against all odds and all predictions, one of the most bankable names in the industry. When Tom Cruise walked onto the set, the applause was immediate and overwhelming. At 62 years old, he moved with the athletic grace of someone who still performed his own stunts, who hung off the sides of airplanes and scaled the world's tallest buildings for the entertainment of audiences worldwide. He was dressed impeccably in a dark suit that fit like it had been sewn onto his body, his famous smile already at full wattage before he even reached the interview chair. He greeted each host with characteristic enthusiasm, making eye contact, remembering names, projecting warmth with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering the art of public interaction. The audience was captivated, as audiences always were. Tom Cruise in person was a force of nature, an energy that filled every corner of the room. Whoopi welcomed him with genuine warmth. Sarah Haynes was visibly charmed. Even Sonny Hostin, usually more reserved, seemed affected by his presence. But Joy Behar sat in her chair with that familiar expression, the one that suggested she had plans that went beyond friendly conversation. "Tom Cruise," Whoopi began, "welcome to The View. We're so excited to have you here to talk about the new Mission Impossible and your absolutely incredible career." "Thank you, Whoopi. It's great to be here," Tom replied, his voice carrying that distinctive intensity he brought to everything. "I love this show. I love what you ladies do here. It's always a real conversation, you know? That's rare in this business. That's something I've always appreciated about coming here." The compliment was smooth, practiced, and completely genuine sounding. But Joy wasn't interested in pleasantries. "So, Tom," Joy interjected before anyone else could speak, "let's get into something real. You've been in Hollywood for over 40 years. You've had incredible successes, but you've also had some very public moments. The Oprah couch, the Matt Lauer interview, the headlines about your personal life. Some people say you've spent the last 2 decades doing damage control. Is the Tom Cruise we see in public the real Tom Cruise, or is it all a very elaborate performance?" The question was designed to be a direct attack on his authenticity. The studio fell quiet. Tom's smile didn't waver, but something shifted almost imperceptibly behind his eyes. "That's an interesting question, Joy," he said, his voice still warm but now carrying a different weight. "I think everyone in public life has a public persona and a private self. That's not unique to me. But I can tell you that what you see is what you get. I love making movies. I love entertaining people. I love pushing myself to do things that scare me. That's who I've been since I was a kid, and that's who I still am." "But the couch incident," Joy pressed, clearly not satisfied with the measured response. "You were jumping on Oprah's couch, talking about Katie Holmes like a teenager with his first crush. Looking back, don't you think that was excessive, maybe even a little unhinged?" The word unhinged hung in the air like a challenge. Several audience members shifted uncomfortably. Tom Cruise had addressed this moment before, but never quite with this level of directness. "I was in love," Tom said simply. "I was happy, and I expressed that happiness in a way that was exuberant. Maybe too exuberant for some people's comfort, but I'd rather be someone who feels things deeply and expresses them than someone who goes through life afraid to show emotion." He paused, and something more personal crept into his voice. "You know what I find interesting about that moment? Millions of people watched it, and most of them smiled. They understood what it felt like to be so happy you couldn't contain it. It was the media that decided it was something to mock, the critics who turned joy into pathology, the cynics who couldn't believe that a man could simply be happy without it being calculated or crazy. He leaned forward slightly, his intensity now fully focused on joy. Have you ever been so happy that you couldn't contain it? That's all that was. A man expressing joy. I'm not going to apologize for being happy. But it wasn't just about happiness, was it? Joy continued, clearly having prepared for this conversation. It was also about control, about image, about presenting a very specific version of Tom Cruise to the world. Some people say you're the most controlling celebrity in Hollywood, that nothing happens without your approval, that even this interview has probably been negotiated down to the specific questions that can be asked. Tom laughed, but there was an edge to it now. If I controlled everything, Joy, you wouldn't be asking these questions right now. The fact that you are suggests that maybe I'm not as controlling as people think. He paused, letting that land before continuing. But let me address what you're really asking. Yes, I'm particular about my work. Yes, I care about the details. Yes, I want every film I make to be the best it can possibly be. If that makes me controlling, then I'll accept that label. Because I'd rather be controlling than careless. I'd rather care too much than not care at all. He leaned back slightly, his voice becoming more reflective. Do you know how many movies I've made? Over 50. And on every single one, I've shown up prepared. I've known my lines, my blocking, my character's motivation. I've understood the technical requirements and worked to make every shot the best it could be. Some people call that controlling. I call it professional. Joy seemed momentarily thrown by his directness, but she recovered quickly. Let's talk about something else that people are curious about. Your faith, Scientology. You've been a member for decades. You're arguably the most famous Scientologist in the world. But there are people who say it's a cult, who claim they've been harmed by the organization. How do you reconcile your association with it, given all the allegations? The studio went very quiet. This was the territory that most interviewers avoided, the subject that had derailed conversations before. Tom's expression didn't change, but his voice became more measured. I'm not going to discuss my personal religious beliefs in this setting, Joy. I respect your right to ask, but I also have the right to keep some things private. What I will say is that my faith has helped me become the person I am. It's helped me in my career, in my relationships, in my understanding of myself. That's all I'm willing to share. But don't you have a responsibility to address the allegations? Joy pushed harder. The people who say they've been hurt, the families who say they've been separated. I have a responsibility to live my life according to my own beliefs and conscience, Tom replied, his voice still controlled, but now carrying steel beneath the surface. I don't have a responsibility to answer for things I have no personal knowledge of. I can only speak to my own experience, and my experience has been positive. He looked directly at Joy, and for the first time, the famous smile was completely gone. I notice you're asking me to justify my religious beliefs in a way you wouldn't ask someone of another faith. If a guest came on here and was Catholic or Jewish or Muslim, would you demand they answer for every allegation ever made against their religion? Or is this standard reserved specifically for me? The observation was pointed and clearly struck something. Joy's face reddened. That's different. Those are established religions. Established by whom? According to what criteria? Tom's voice was rising slightly, though still controlled. Who decides which beliefs are legitimate and which aren't? You, the media? I've practiced my faith for over 40 years. It's central to who I am, and I won't have it dismissed as somehow less valid because it's not mainstream enough for some people's comfort. Whoopi tried to intervene. Maybe we should talk about the new film. No, Whoopi, I think this is important, Tom said, his eyes still fixed on Joy. Because this is what happens every time. I come to talk about work I'm proud of, and the conversation gets hijacked into areas designed to make me defensive, to make me look bad, to dig up the same controversies that have been discussed 1,000 times before. He turned to address the audience directly. I've been doing this for 43 years. I've made some of the most successful films in history. I've worked with the greatest directors, the greatest actors, the greatest crews. I've pushed the boundaries of what's possible in action filmmaking, and yet, every interview seems to circle back to the same handful of moments. The couch, the religion, the personal life. His voice grew stronger. When do I get to just talk about the work? When do I get to discuss what it's like to hang off the side of an airplane at 5,000 feet? To hold my breath underwater for 6 minutes? To do a halo jump for real? That's what I want to talk about. The craft, the passion, the dedication. But somehow, that never seems to be enough. Joy seemed to sense she was losing control of the interview, and she made one more attempt to reclaim it. But that's exactly the point, Tom. The stunts, the risk-taking, the constant need to top yourself. Some people say that's not dedication. That's ego. That's a man who needs to prove something, who can't accept getting older, who's chasing something he'll never catch. The accusation landed in the silent studio like a bomb. Tom was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was different, quieter, more personal. You want to know why I do the stunts myself? It's not ego, it's respect. Respect for the audience who pays to see something real. Respect for the stunt coordinators and crews who train me. Respect for the art of filmmaking, which deserves more than CGI and green screens when something authentic is possible. He paused, collecting himself. I broke my ankle on the last Mission Impossible, hit the side of a building at full speed. And you know what I did? I finished the take, because that's what professionals do. That's what the craft demands. Not because I'm trying to prove something, but because I refuse to accept anything less than my best. He looked around the studio, his voice gaining strength. I've learned to fly helicopters for these films. I've done underwater sequences that required holding my breath for over 6 minutes. I've jumped out of airplanes at 30,000 feet in a halo jump that had never been filmed before. I've clung to the outside of a plane as it took off. And every single time, I did it because I believe the audience deserves to see something real. His voice cracked slightly with emotion. I'm 62 years old. I've been making movies since I was 19, and I still feel the same fire I felt when I was a kid in Syracuse dreaming of being in the movies. That's not ego, Joy. That's love. Love for what I do. Love for the people I work with. Love for the audiences who have supported me for over 4 decades. He paused, collecting the emotion before continuing. When I was young, I had dyslexia so severe I could barely read. Teachers told me I'd never amount to anything, but I found something I was good at, something I loved, and I gave everything to it. Everything. That's the story of my life. Not the couch, not the controversies, the work, the dedication, the refusal to ever stop growing. He stood up, and the movement commanded immediate attention. You asked earlier if the public Tom Cruise is the real Tom Cruise. Here's your answer. The real Tom Cruise is someone who has dedicated his entire adult life to making the best movies he possibly can. Someone who has taken risks that most people wouldn't even consider. Someone who has failed publicly and gotten back up again. Someone who has been mocked and criticized and written off more times than he can count, and is still here, still working, still passionate. He looked around the studio. The real Tom Cruise is also someone who is tired of being reduced to sound bites and scandals. Tired of having his faith questioned, his relationships dissected, his motives analyzed by people who don't know him. I've given over 40 years to this industry. I've given everything I have to my work. And sometimes, that doesn't feel like it's enough for people who would rather talk about a couch than a career. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Tom wasn't finished. I've done interviews with people who genuinely wanted to understand the craft, who asked about working with directors, about preparing for roles, about the technical challenges of modern filmmaking. Those conversations were wonderful. This conversation has been something else entirely. He straightened his jacket. You came in here with an agenda, with questions designed to provoke and destabilize. And I've been doing this too long not to recognize it. So, let me be clear about something. I'm not going to apologize for my success. I'm not going to apologize for my faith. I'm not going to apologize for expressing joy, or for taking risks, or for being exactly who I am. He looked at Joy one final time. What I will do is ask you a question. In all your years of interviewing people, of asking hard questions, of holding celebrities accountable, what have you actually created? What have you built that will outlast you? What will people remember about your career other than the fights you picked and the guests you provoked? The question hung in the air, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. I've created things that people will watch long after I'm gone. Films that have inspired millions. Performances that have moved people to tears and laughter and awe. That's my legacy. What's yours? He turned to Whoopi. I'm sorry, Whoopi. I have enormous respect for you and what you've built here. But I can't continue this conversation. It's not productive for anyone, and it's certainly not what your audience tuned in to see. He began walking toward the edge of the set. Wait, Joy called out. We're not done. Tom stopped and turned back with a smile that was somehow both warm and devastating. We were done the moment you decided this was going to be an interrogation instead of an interview. I just let it play out to see if you'd change course. You didn't. He addressed the audience one final time, his voice filled with conviction. To everyone watching who has ever been made to feel that their achievements don't matter because of who they are or what they believe, I want you to know something. Your work speaks for itself. Your dedication speaks for itself. Don't let anyone diminish what you've built because they're more interested in tearing down than building up. And with that, Tom Cruise walked off the set of The View with the same athletic grace with which he had entered, leaving behind a studio that seemed to vibrate with the aftermath of what had just occurred. The audience sat in stunned silence. Whoopi looked genuinely troubled, and Joy Behar sat at the table looking like someone who had expected to be the hunter and had found herself outmaneuvered at every turn. What had started as an attempt to crack through Tom Cruise's famous composure had instead revealed something far more compelling. A man who had spent 40 years learning exactly who he was and what he would and wouldn't accept. A man who could defend himself without losing control. A man who understood that the best response to an ambush wasn't anger, but clarity. And a man who, despite everything the tabloids had thrown at him over the decades, still believed in the power of dedication and the value of giving audiences something real. The aftermath of that interview would dominate entertainment news for weeks. Some praised Joy for asking tough questions. Many more praised Tom for finally pushing back against the media's obsession with decades-old controversies. But perhaps the most significant outcome was a new understanding of who Tom Cruise really was beneath all the headlines and the speculation and the endless analysis. He was a man who loved his work, who had given everything to his craft, who refused to apologize for any of it, and who, at 62 years old, still had the fire that had made him a star in the first place. Some people called that ego. He called it dedication. And on that day, in that studio, dedication had won. For those who had grown up watching Maverick soar through the skies, who had held their breath as Ethan Hunt dangled from impossible heights, who had been moved by Jerry Maguire's desperate sincerity, there was something deeply satisfying about watching the man behind those characters refuse to be reduced to tabloid fodder. Tom Cruise had spent 4 decades giving audiences everything he had, and when someone tried to make him feel ashamed of that gift, he had simply, calmly, definitively refused. That was the real lesson of that day. Not about celebrity or scandal or religious controversy, but about the power of knowing exactly who you are and refusing to let anyone else define you. Tom Cruise had learned that lesson over 40 years in the most unforgiving spotlight in the world, and he had demonstrated it with a grace that his critics would never understand, but his fans would never forget. What do you think about this incredible confrontation? Was Joy Behar out of line, or was she just doing her job? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that will absolutely leave you speechless.